Hello, I'm Mark Orton, the creator of American Delusions, and welcome to this episode, an in-depth look at monopolization in the U.S. economy. This is really a book review of Zephyr Teachout's very recently released book, Break 'em Up. So let's start with a bit of context. What is a monopoly? Many people think that a monopoly is a single buyer or seller in a market. In practice, however, when 3 or 4 companies or fewer sometimes control over 60% of a market, that market is considered concentrated. That's a definition by the US government, or it's a monopolized market. Other terms have been used to describe markets in which a few sellers dominate or otherwise control a market. Trusts, monopolies, cartels, syndicates. So a little bit more context here. Up to about 1980, U.S. antitrust law considered market control of even 5 or 6% by a company to be sufficient to prevent a merger with another company in the same market. Vertical and horizontal mergers were discouraged. A vertical merger is one in which a company buys suppliers, distributors, and sometimes even customers up and down, so it's vertical. Horizontal is probably the one we most often think of, where a single company buys its competitors in the marketplace to increase market share and market control. Also involved with this is price fixing and other predatory practices which are forbidden. So the goal of traditional U.S. antitrust policy from the 1890s, the Gilded Age, through the 1970s, has been to maintain competitive markets. The notion that capitalism works best when markets are competitive. The antitrust laws sought out to prevent and punish anti-competitive practices. And a consequence of this is to enlarge individual freedom of action. It's one of the peculiarities of the current conservative mind in the U.S. that they're ignoring the fact that the highly monopolized economy impinges and prevents individuals from acting. So what does the monopolized economy in the U.S. look like today? So here's some examples: smartphones, cable TV service, chicken, beef, pork, airlines, entertainment, beer, and so on. And there are a lot more. But let me give you a few highlights so that you can see in more detail what this means. Let's take beer. So Anheuser-Busch controls 40% of the market, Miller Coors 23%, Constellation Brands, and frankly I'd never heard of them, but they produce Modelo, Pacifico, and other beers. They control 11%. So those 3 companies alone control 74% of the beer market. Now, if you look at cell phone service, you see a very similar pattern. AT&T is at 42%, Verizon 30%, T-Mobile 17%. So those 3 combined control 89%. So if you look around at the U.S. economy, most of the major markets are quite concentrated or monopolized. And one of the consequences of this is that we've seen a long-term decline in new business formation. And this chart shows how companies less than 1 year old have declined by 50%, almost 50%, in 35 years. So Zephyr Teachout introduces a great metaphor, which she calls chickenization. This is a kind of a convenient image of what's going on in the economy. So the first element is horizontal consolidation. So 3 processors control almost all of the chicken produced in the U.S. Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride, and Perdue. They control every aspect of a chicken farmer's business. And through vertical consolidation, feed mills, hatcheries, transportation, packagers, and marketers, chicken farmers are not independent businesses. They're just a component of an integrated monopoly. A study by the Small Business Administration cites this. We found integrator control, that's the three processors, exercised through a series of contractual restrictions, management agreements, oversight inspections, and market controls. This control overcame practically all of a grower's ability to operate their business independent of integrator mandates. So one of the results of this monopolization is that farmers are earning far less than they used to. In 1985, farmers received about 40 cents of every dollar we spent in the grocery store on food. Today, it's less than 15 cents. So Teachout claims, and I think it's appropriate, that this is a form of anti-democratic tyranny. So Teachout's big arguments, she really is going to make two arguments. I'm going to quote a little bit here. First, I will argue that monopoly is tyranny, that no democracy can survive for long once a few corporations have amassed governmental power in such massive form and scale. These corporations use isolation, surveillance, experimentation, and fear to extract value from workers, silence political dissent, exploit users, and regulate all of us. The second is one that concerns strategy. We need to organize an antitrust movement for our time. And she points out that boycotts are really not the way forward. We need to stop mergers, break up large corporations, regulate aspects of big tech as a public utility. So that's like water, electricity, the former telephone industry. Strengthen unions, change the way elections are funded, and use existing laws to investigate and regulate corporations. And she concludes with, we must all embrace an anti-monopoly vision in order to achieve the moral economy that we deserve. And we'll come back to exactly what she means by moral economy later. So Teachout has a lot of illustrations of how this monopolization has been taking place and its effects. Big tech, that's Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook, have essentially, over the last 10, 15 years, demolished local newspapers. And many of them have now been replaced by sham internet services. Probably all of us, at least those of us in the United States who are watching this video, are part of a system of coerced arbitration. It's referred to in your credit card contract as alternative dispute resolution. In 1991, 2% of employment contracts had mandatory arbitration clauses. Today, over half of non-union private sector jobs are bound by arbitration. So this means if you have a complaint that might otherwise lead to a civil court case, you're forbidden from doing that, and you have to submit your complaint to an arbitrator. And these arbitrators are largely the creatures of the corporations that employ them. And then we have the Supreme Court ruling United v. FEC that opened the floodgates to corporations and their money in American politics. So these are just some of the ones that caught my attention, and there are others. So she points out that 96% of Fortune 500 company CEOs are white. And then there's the wage mystery, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because this is a really interesting topic. In the 1950s, CEOs of corporations made about 20 times the salary of the average worker. Now, CEOs on average are paid 361 times the average worker. And here is really the heart of the wage mystery. From 1948 to 1979, the value produced by workers per hour rose 108%, and their pay went up 93%. So that's a good parallel. As they produce more, they earn more. But between 1979 and 2018, worker productivity increased 69%, but average pay only 11%. So essentially, for over 40 years, there has been only an 11% real increase in the average income, despite the 69% increase in output. Meanwhile, executive pay rose 1,000%. So here's a visualization of what I just said, and I think it's important to see it. You can see clearly the parallel lines from the post-World War II era up into 1980, and then there's this yawning gap between productivity increases and hourly compensation. So this is undoubtedly largely the result of the lack of bargaining power by workers against highly monopolized industries. So she also talks about the power of money in the finance sector. I won't go into that very much, but she has some interesting observations. One of them here from William Buffett, the famous investor. If you are investing in a business competition, you're doing it wrong. One of the key things that I learned in my earlier corporate business life was that being in a commodity business where you had lots of competitors was not a very pleasant thing because profits were always very small. And then there's Porter's 5 forces. Almost anybody who has been taken business courses or been to business school for an MBA since the 1980s knows about Porter's 5 forces. This is an analysis looking at a company from the point of view of where are the competitive challenges and how to overcome or avoid them. So it's really key to how managers think about their role. So the history of anti-monopoly in the United States is long and rich. It starts really right after the Civil War, accelerates through the Gilded Age, and leads to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, followed by the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, and a very aggressive and successful campaign by the federal government to prevent the formation of monopolies and to control them. And many federal court rulings affirmed these activities through up to the 1970s. So an important notion here is we're not starting from scratch. There's plenty of history and law on the side of the anti-monopolists. So here are Teacher's 3 basic anti-monopoly principles, and I'm going to read at some length here. Number 1, open competitive markets working together with publicly provided services and neutral infrastructure are necessary for economic liberty. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to every industry, but unregulated private monopoly poses a unique threat. Private corporations with too much power raise prices for consumers, depress wages for workers, choke off democracy, and regulate all of us. And something that I pointed out earlier, monopolies also depress the innovation and robustness of a market system. Second, to preserve rough economic and political equality, we should make it easier to organize people and harder to organize capital. It should be as easy to unionize or to create a cooperative as it is hard to merge Goliaths. And finally, it's better to err on the side of decentralized private power. Democratic governance is messy and will lead to mistakes, but corporate government will lead to tyranny. So, towards the end of the book, Teachout begins to talk about this concept of a moral market. And so I picked this quote out because it really illustrates what she means by a moral market. We should aim for an economy in which the people who make things, who buy things, who sell things, and who interact with each other do so from positions of dignity, with enough power to know that they matter. It should be possible for all actors, the buyer, the seller, the worker, to play their roles with integrity. The moral freedom of the medium-sized shopkeeper, producer, and business owner, of the farm worker and the electrician is essential to the moral fabric of a democratic community. So I have some further thoughts about this. First, it really defies the rules of capitalism. Profit is the predominant metric of success for every capitalist. In fact, it's not just a metric, it's a requirement. And the more you make, the better. Another factor is that capitalism is rife with externalized costs. So these are pollution, worker injury, and so on. They're part of a central business strategy that says, if I can get somebody else to pay for it, then I'll have higher profits. And we have the power of mass marketing, which has produced excessive consumption and commodity fetishism. So some other things to think about are that moral markets require deep constraints on the political action of the rich and corporations. Without that, they will continue to dominate the governments, and regulations will really be regulations in their favor. It would be great to change the ownership and control of corporations so that workers in the community can be represented and have some voice in what a corporation does. And a well-organized and robust political action by the bottom 90% of the population is really central. Political parties that actually represent those interests, which one cannot say about either the Republicans or the Democrats. So what's the upshot? The monopolization of the U.S. economy has significant negative outcomes for us as individuals, for our families and communities, and the country as a whole. It degrades and starves public life, public resources, public infrastructure. This has been one of the dominant themes of the last 40 years of American politics. It starts with President Reagan's famous invocation that the government is not the solution, it's the problem. Monopolization drives the wealth and income gap, and it's amazing, but it's growing worse even during this pandemic. And it corrupts our politics and government. Dark money has bought up both political parties and is intimately involved through lobbying and other activities in every aspect of law and regulation. And it's always to the benefit of rich and corporations. So Teachout's closing vision. We face a major fork in the road right now on the way to that American dream. We can continue down a path of corporate concentration, gradually ceding authority over our lives to a few hundred individuals. Or we can rise up to break those companies apart and then, with power appropriately distributed, begin the ongoing, endless, but beautiful, human, moral work of self-governance by free people. So I find Teachout's book to be a great introduction to one of the central problems of American life and the future of the country, which is the incredible concentration of ownership of companies and wealth in general. So I highly recommend the book to you. So here are the references, and don't forget that you can always find these below the description in the video. So thanks for watching this episode of American Delusions. And visit us at AmericanDelusions.com.